All right, let's dive right into this explainer and build a masterclass on organizational execution. Today, we're taking the psychology of human resources, mixing it with the growth strategies of corporate ventures, and topping it off with the massive scale of military defense management. We are putting all of that together to form a complete, well-rounded picture of how to actually get things done. So, you might be wondering what actually separates a great idea from successful execution. I mean, we see common corporate failures literally all the time, right? You've got employee burnout, stalled innovations, budgets just spiraling completely out of control. But ultimately, every single one of those issues stems from a failure to execute. Coming up with the idea is maybe 10% of the battle. The rest? Well, it's a really complex equation of managing your people, managing growth, and leveraging data. To solve that equation, we're going to explore the three pillars of execution. First up, autonomy and accountability. Then, the discipline of scaling. And finally, evaluating success with KPIs. Let's kick things off with Section 1, autonomy and accountability, which is all about the human element. Think about it like this. We've got a pretty stark contrast here. On one side, you have autonomy that gives your employees freedom, it sparks innovation, and it creates a real sense of ownership. But on the other side, you've got accountability, which demands responsibility for outcomes and absolute alignment with your business goals. Now, autonomy without accountability, that's just a recipe for chaos. But when you lock them together, they drive incredibly deep job satisfaction and peak performance. I absolutely love this concept from Dr. Stephen Covey. He says accountability breeds responsibility. We usually think of accountability as a bad thing, right? Like a restriction or a micromanager breathing down your neck. But the reality is that it's an absolutely vital tool for professional growth. It empowers your people to actually own their responses and own their successes. And the research totally backs this up. Organizational psychologists like Daniel Pink and Adam Grant point out that autonomous motivation is a massive, massive driver of deep engagement. But to prevent all that autonomy from turning into strategic misalignment, you have to have structured expectations. And the best way to do this is by using SMART goals. Specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. That way, the final destination is crystal clear, even if the employee chooses their own unique path to get there. Okay, so how do we actually pull this off in the real world? It basically boils down to 4 practical steps. First, set expectations with really clear metrics. Second, provide feedback regularly because you don't want autonomy to turn into isolation. Third, encourage self-assessment so your employees are tracking their own progress. And fourth, create trust. You literally have to trust your team to make decisions while handing them the tools to track their own achievements. All right, so you've got this fully empowered, highly motivated team. Awesome. But now what? How do you actually take those brilliant ideas and bring them to the market? Having an engaged team is fantastic. But what do those empowered people actually do to generate real value? That brings us right into Section 2, the discipline of scaling, focusing on the growth element. When we look at the research, innovation really breaks down into 3 distinct disciplines. 1, ideation, which is just coming up with the new ideas. 2, incubation, where you start developing and testing those ideas. And 3, scaling. Scaling is absolutely the crucial final step. You could argue it's the most important part, because this is the exact moment where those abstract ideas actually turn into real-world value, revenue, and jobs. It's the whole shebang. But let's be real, scaling is incredibly tough. Why does it fail so often? Well, it usually comes down to a lack of resources, a lack of specialized expertise, or just a corporate culture that plain doesn't support innovation. This is exactly where so many companies hit a brick wall. Scaling an idea requires entirely different resources, a completely different skill set, and a totally different cultural support system than what you used back in the ideation phase. So, to get past that wall, you need to build what the experts call a scaling path, and that means assembling 3 specific types of assets. First up, customers. You need actual market reach and sales channels. Second, organizational capability. That means having the right technology, the right skills, and the right business models in place. And third, organizational capacity. You need the literal physical ability to manage increasing volumes, things like fulfillment, manufacturing, and customer service. To put the potential of this into perspective, $500 million. No joke. The research highlights Deborah DeZanzo over at Best Buy Health. They leverage their core corporate assets to assemble a custom scaling path specifically to enter the home healthcare market. The result? A 1,000-employee business unit generating over $500 million in revenue. That is the incredible, game-changing power of a deliberate scaling discipline. So you've scaled your idea. It's massive. It's out in the wild. But that brings up another really big challenge. How do we rigorously measure if these scaled initiatives are actually succeeding? How do we track that performance without just relying on pure guesswork?
Which leads us perfectly into Section 3, evaluating success with KPIs, or the evaluation element.
When you want to understand how to evaluate massive, wildly complex operations, you look to the military. The research introduces us to PPBE, the Planning, Programming, Budgeting, Execution, and Evaluation System. Now, that's a mouthful, but it's basically a cyclical process used by the Department of Defense. Its ultimate objective is to provide the absolute best possible mix of support and equipment, all while operating under extremely strict fiscal constraints.
And this framework doesn't just exist in a vacuum. It ties directly into identifying actual requirements and managing real-world acquisitions. The whole point is to link your funding directly to your overarching strategy. And if you want continuous improvement in this cycle, the most critical phase is the evaluation phase.
Right inside that evaluation phase, you've got to rely on key performance indicators, or KPIs, to cut through the noise of massive amounts of data. Effective KPIs always possess 5 distinct traits, and you'll notice these heavily mirror the SMART goals we talked about earlier. They need specificity, measurability, achievability, relevance to the strategy, and timeliness so you can take fast action. Let's bring this down to earth and translate that abstract defense theory into some concrete business metrics. If your decision process involves strategic planning, your KPI might be ROI to measure profitability. If you're looking at resource allocation, your KPI could be time to market to track your launch efficiency. For customer engagement, you'd look at customer satisfaction scores. Having these quantifiable metrics allows stakeholders to actually make data-driven decisions and adjust resource allocation on the fly. All right, let's pull all 3 of these pillars together into what I like to call the execution equation. Empowered people, meaning you balance autonomy with accountability, plus a deliberate scaling path, where you assemble the customers, capacity, and capabilities to grow, plus rigorous KPI measurement, using frameworks to evaluate what's really happening. When you combine human motivation, structured growth, and hard data, the result is sustainable organizational success. Before we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a question to really chew on. Which of these 3 pillars of execution is your organization currently overlooking? Are you maybe failing to empower your people? Are you stalling out on your scaling path? Or are you just forgetting to measure your real-world impact? Find that blind spot, fix the equation, and watch your execution take off. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.